Crisis is bound to happen. You have to be prepared to deal with crisis, especially if I'm dealing with corporate executives. Preparing for a crisis and responding appropriately can make all the difference. It is the determining factor between closure and survival. There are two sides to managing any crisis: planning and response. Organizations that anticipate the possibility of a crisis and prepare properly will be better equipped to manage such situations, to limit their impact, or to avoid them altogether. For businesses, it is fundamental to develop a strong team with the ingenuity and know-how to respond to all eventualities. If a crisis compromises a company's integrity, principles, reputation, or even financial standing, there is only one solution for that: crisis management. This is what we're going to discuss with our panelists. I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they are seated. I have next to me Mr. Walid Abu Khalid. He is the president and CEO of Petra Solar. Next to him is Mr. George Haymari, partner at Booz & Company. We have with us Mr. Samer Sarraf. He is the country head of UAE Amwal Al Khalij. Mr. Michel Ayat is the CEO of Arabian Automobiles, part of the Rustamani Group. And Mr. Dilip Rahulan is the CEO of Pacific Controls. Before we start our discussion, I'd like Mr. Ayat to offer our condolences and the Forbes team's condolences for the loss of your brother. We appreciate it so much that on such a sad occasion, you kept your word and you are here with us today on the panel. So thank you very much for being with us, and our condolences again. We are so sorry for your loss. As I said earlier, I'm going to try to take the questions from the audience a little bit earlier now so that I give you a chance to ask your questions to our panelists. Let us start our discussion with Mr. Walid Abu Khalid here beside me. In your industry, basically it is solar energy. A new technology can come up, and suddenly you can become obsolete, your technology overnight. So you are basically in an industry that is packed with risks. How does a company prepare itself in that sector for any crisis that might happen?
Well, thank you very much. First, honestly, I would love to thank Forbes for hosting this event. And I think it's extremely important to have this event with, I would say, local talents who are based in the Middle East, to have the Middle Eastern thinking spread in here, and so for people to know what's going on from Middle Eastern perspectives. So thanks for that. I believe just to slight correction, I know the name is Petra Solar. Most people would jump into conclusion it's a solar energy company, but it's more in renewable energy, smart energy, coming up with solutions to cater for finding alternative energy, green energy. Now, you're absolutely right. I think there's a huge risk with any advanced technology company to say, you can invest millions and millions in certain technology doing R&D, and then the next day something happens and that's it, all your investments, it's gone. And we've seen many examples in the history. But I believe good companies will always have great crisis management plans. Now, crisis management plan usually cater for possibilities or different scenarios of natural disasters, but I think the clever ones will also include elements that will have possible predictable disasters. As an example, there's recent examples that everyone can associate with. Who would have ever thought Nokia, who was a world leader in mobile phone just 2 years ago, world leaders, it was untouchable. Now people are thinking, could it go bankrupt? And funny enough, I was trying to buy a phone for my daughter yesterday, and I said, does your, from Nokia, does it have Viber? And I said, no, it doesn't have Viber. Well, Skype, well, it does have Skype text only, not video. Well, not a single person would buy it. So I think that the crisis from that perspective, unfortunately, it's too late. So they did not spot the trends and how things are going, and they ended up in such a position. So for any advanced technology, I think the secret is ensuring you've got a great marketing team, a great CFO with solid financial analysts below him who can give you the right data so you can see the trends, how things are going, and ensure that you take the appropriate action to ensure you don't get to a crisis mode. Now, should the crisis happen, then again, you need, I think, great leadership to come up with solutions to overcome those crises. But I'm a true believer that don't wait for the crisis to happen, act beforehand.
George, you come from, basically you are a partner at Booz, but you cover the financial sector. So basically you can tell us a lot about the financial sector, and especially that these days when we talk about crisis, the first thing that comes to mind is the financial crisis of 2008. And definitely here in the Gulf, we thought we are protected, we thought everything is okay, but everybody felt the crisis. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience of the banking sector in dealing with that crisis?
I think well, the first thing to say is that it was clear that the banking sector was not really prepared for a crisis of that magnitude and of that complexity, I would say. But it is also fair to say that the impact of the crisis was varied and was not felt equally in the region. So there were certain countries where the crisis was felt much more strongly than others. But if we look at the main kind of lessons learned that came out of the crisis for financial institutions, it was clear that the first lesson learned was that we in this region are not immune, and the world has evolved in such a way that we are now very interconnected with the rest of the markets, the rest of the global centers, and as such, anything that happens in the global economy will ultimately have some repercussion on the banks.
Even though we have the oil wealth, it does not.
Even though we have,
sector.
We have stronger fundamentals from an economic perspective. The second thing is that banks have learned that the trade-off between growth and business opportunities and risk should be managed much better. And in that perspective, I would say, they've learned that risk management should not be done in a reactive way, or should not be done as a response to something, but rather in a predictive and preemptive way. The third thing, which I believe banks have also learned, is frankly how to deal with communication. Communication is key in times of crisis, and I would say it's both arts and science, and so that again was a key learning for the banks, and how to deal with the crisis as well. And finally, I think what the banks have learned, and what the crisis has also surfaced, is some of the limitations from a regulatory perspective, and so again here, regulators have made the effort to become better prepared and better equipped, but the banks have also had to kind of go through a learning process with the regulators to get to that stage.
Interesting, when you mentioned communications, it reminded me that the biggest case of what happened in terms of communication was the Dubai World Standstill Agreement that was announced over a weekend, and when it was a weekend in the Western world, and it was a Eid in this part of the world, and basically all the TV channels didn't have any news, because over a weekend you don't have any news to say, and everybody didn't have except that story to tell over and over again. There was an information vacuum, and that story came out, and basically it was so blown out of proportion worldwide because it came during Eid. So this is it stresses the importance of communication when crisis happens. Mr. Samer, you are responsible for the Amal Khalij in the UAE. You are the head for the UAE. You as a private equity firm, of course, you deal with different sectors, with companies from different sectors. And you have had also your share of experiences with crises, with companies that you have invested in. Can you tell us a little bit about those experiences and what are the lessons learned?
Certainly. I think most industries, we have experiences different types of crises, and so these are publicly known, whether it's through the mass was one example where there was a crisis in the sense that there was money that was taken out of the company, that was a publicly listed company, without the proper authorities in place. This event was clearly marked out in the different press, and the way that was handled was we immediately informed the authorities and tried to put in place the measures that are needed to rectify the error that was happened. Now, one of the things that we're noticing was this event was not a matter of fraud or what have you, but rather the lack of understanding of what does it mean to be a publicly listed company, what does it mean to have investors, institutional investors to come in place, by which they continue to treat the company as a private company. However, obviously there's certain mechanisms and certain authorities that have to be put in place to safeguard the shareholders of those companies, and there was a clear breach of those responsibilities by the management at that point in time. Again, the lessons learned from there was, one is you need to make sure that the people that you're investing with do understand clearly what does it mean to be a publicly listed company and have investors. Really enhance the authorities that are in place, the corporate governance that is needed, and then to make sure that you have outlined exactly what needs to be done in case there's an issue. In the same way that the board met, automatically went to see the DFSA, informed them of the issues that were happening, and tried to brought in external auditors to check on the financials and to try to put things in place. In another situation, we've had a lot of it is linked actually to the financial crisis. One of them was with a company called the Maritime Industrial Services, by which a client defaulted in a large sum of money that had a very big impact on the cash flows of a business. This was during a time when cash was king. The debt crisis was in full swing, and this is not something that a company or a medium-sized company can afford very easily. These issues as well had the lessons learned, and the way to handle with these crises was a lot of it has to do with the immediate action that is taken and the steps taken by the board, by the shareholders, moving together, agreeing on a course of action, and recognizing the issues that are at hand, and putting in place the exact measures that are needed to help the company. Now, there are two steps to it, the way we see it. There's one, the first step was to go and do an immediate assessment of the damages, what needs to be done, and quickly rectify the situation, by which to find a solution, out-of-the-box solution, to help this company get back their cash in this position. The second is a more medium to long-term impact, by which you go back and look at what had happened. How do you fix it? Assess if the solution that was chosen was the appropriate one. How do you modify it to make it more sustainable in the long term, and put that in place and embed it into your processes, your day-to-day business, to make sure that such issues do not come up again.
We'll elaborate on many of the steps that you just mentioned. Mr. Hayat, you come from a different, industry, and you have had your share of problems as well as a result of the financial crisis of 2008, but in the car industry. So as well, we'd like to hear about that experience and what are the lessons learned. How did you overcome that at the time?
Yeah, what I want to say in the beginning that not all companies, most of the companies, they were late in spotting the crisis. And
everybody was late in 2008. I think يمكن بنعدوا على أصابع الإيد the ones who spotted the.
We were here lucky. We were here lucky because 08 was one of the best financial years for the businesses in the Gulf. However, many other companies, international companies, they were late until the collapse of the Lehman Bank. So the Lehman Brothers Bank was the sign that the financial crisis is there.
That Armageddon is happening.
This is something we actually we were not different than the others. We thought that we are in part of the oil producing countries. We are really in good hands, protected, and the ripples will not come. But actually, the January 09 was a big hit for the automotive industry, and I believe that the automotive industry and the properties were the main two big economic sectors that have been impacted by that. In our case, we reacted to the crisis, which I consider now we can extract lessons that we are really employing in the years. First of all, we realized that the external environment, that the business dropped by 45% down. People, they stopped buying cars. So the in the pipeline, you know that 08, it was the fantastic year. In the United Arab Emirates, the total industry volume for the 08 reached 345,000 units. So the pipeline, you know that in our business, we don't get off-shelf cars. We order cars.
So you had a big stock of
So
inventory
the
at
big
the time.
stock, and the manufacturers at that time, they were also in a bigger the trouble. So they didn't cooperate with us to cancel so the orders were there, and they were enough for more than 12 months in the business. So what we happened at the same time, the banks and our the friend of the Emirates Bank, they were very strict. They stopped extending loans to the customer. So the people are really worried. They are not sure or certain about the business, the jobs. The banks, they were very strict, the business down, and we have, our company, we have more than 24,000 units, which are enough or adequate for more than 12 months. They are sitting, waiting for the customer.
How did you deal with that, Mr. Ayad? What are the lessons learned from that time?
So the lessons which we, first of all, let me say that in a crisis, you cannot solve the crisis. You can mitigate, you can lessen, or to reduce the impact. There's no drug, miracle drug to say that this is the drug. And it varies from one company. We stopped applying at that time the normal budgetary norms and the balance scorecard and the management by the objectives, and we went to flexible. The flexible and the scenario planning is the first lesson. We have to understand what the situation analysis, carefully get the data, analyze the data, evaluate it to see the impact on the business and to take the countermeasure. The second thing that I have to say, we were very open with the people, the communication, transparent. This is the company. We are facing now 2 billion dirhams in the stock, and we want all to. We empowered the business units to make the decisions fast. So all these have helped us to cure the situation by taking the decisions fast, and sometimes serious decision. What I mean by serious decision is to sell below cost, because you need the cash flow. So this is what we did. At the same time, we know that the customers who are not, they don't want to buy a car, but they want to serve the car. So the service, there was a demand on the service, which we have used it as the cash cow there to get the money and to liquidate the stock. I can say that the 09 profitability went down 71, but at the end of 09, it was a good year. We learned a lot from it, which we are now employing in the business plan.
If I want to summarize, you acted quickly, you turned your company into a flexible model,
flexible planning,
and you took bold decisions to sell at below cost.
And to be transparent.
And to be transparent with the media. Mr. Dilip, you are in a different sector. You are very much dependent on the real estate sector, and we know that one of the major things that happened after the crisis and after the Dubai World standstill was the real estate crash in the UAE. So how was that for your business, and what did you have to do to deal with that?
It's very interesting. In terms of how you look at this, ours is a very unique case where we sell concepts and technology that influence the way people manage infrastructure and buildings. And so even when we started our business, there was huge challenges way back in 2010 when the concept of virtualization was not prevalent. So when we walked to customers and told them about the way the technology is going to shift, nobody would accept it. From that time onwards, we actually...
Can you just explain the link between technology and your business to everyone so that they understand what is its relationship with the real estate sector?
It's a very unique paradigm where our business is all about making machines speak to enterprise. And if you actually take a concept of what Twitter does today, if you allow the machines to tweet between themselves and start making strategic decisions, the whole concept of business intelligence is virtualized. This is what we do. So if we went and spoke to an architect or a consultant in 2000 and told them that this is the way the business is going to go, it's going to all converge together on the IT realm, people wouldn't believe you. So it really took a heap of effort in order to actually convince and achieve our first customer. And I must tell you that being in the right place at the right time, Dubai is actually a very, very unique, fertile environment for businesses where technology spectrums can be experimented, tested, and proven as a success story. Our Pacific Controls is very unique in that spectrum. We achieved Dubai government as one of our first customers at the Dubai International Airport. We today are proud to say that the company moved from that paradigm to a new paradigm, and when the crisis hit, our dependency on the real estate was quite phenomenal. So it was predominantly a challenge in order to shift from the dependency on real estate to move to other spectrums of brownfield infrastructure and how we could manage them utilizing the same concept.
How did you do that turnaround?
The whole turnaround was all about how to look at existing stock and how we looked at our business in terms of mobilization. We were traditionally a company that were doing business as an entity without collaboration. We decided that going to the market, looking at the whole ecosystem and collaborating with partners would actually create new avenues of creating dimensional change in the way we offered customers solutions and business processes. So today, we are proud to say that our partnership is very well announced in the market with telcos and major infrastructure management companies, where we actually share our concept, technology, and revenue stream with third party. This changed the whole paradigm in how we built this. Way back in 2010, we were a 5-man company. Today, we are having 950 employees. We have transformed it into a multi-billion-dollar business.
All of these have been examples of how to deal with the crisis, but most of them have been financial crises and with financial ramifications. I guess, Mr. Saraf, you have the only example where it had to do with reputational damage, because right now I can think of several companies who had reputational problems, and this is totally different. How do you deal and redeem the reputation of a company? So can you tell us a little bit of what happens when you have reputational damage? What kind of crisis management is needed then, other than the typical examples that we heard of now in the financial sector?
When it comes to reputational damage, a lot of it has to do with what some of the panelists have mentioned, is communication, and making sure that the communication out there is very clear and what is the issue at hand.
Sorry, let me clear up. We're talking about Damas, so that it's not about your company.
So with that, the thing about that, while it was more of a financial issue with the company, the brand of itself actually managed to maintain it. The reason, because the stores were still there, the customers were still coming to the store, it didn't have an impact on the operational side of things. So the brand, for some, actually, it was a bit of a surprise in a way that the financial press focused just on the financial issues of the company, and the customers did not associate the financial issues with the brand itself and the product that they were providing.
So you didn't actively need to do anything about that to maintain the brand reputation?
We did have to do some things. We had to be careful on how trying to maintain the image so that it does not have a spillover effect on the brand. So you have to be careful how you manage that, making sure the communication is very clear, focusing things on what the issues have, what really went wrong, what were the issues. And to really emphasize that these were financial, transactional issues between the founding shareholders and the company itself, but nothing to do with the brand itself. And at the same time, maintaining whether it's advertising and the promotion of the brand as a luxury item brand, so to keep up the image of it. At the same time, part of the result of what has happened was a restructuring that was needed into the company itself. So when the restructuring came along, we need to be careful how it was done to ensure that the image and the brand of the product is not impacted in any way, and to make sure that the client and the customer is still receiving the same kind of service and quality product that they were always accustomed to, and that hasn't changed, no matter what the background issues that were behind it.
Basically, what we've been hearing is the crisis management side, but before the crisis happens, basically the lesson learned is that we have to be prepared for it. So my question here is, how can you be really prepared for a crisis? My question is for you, Mr. Abu Khalid. How can a company become resilient enough to absorb shocks when crises happen? So what needs to be done to be better prepared, to make that company prepared?
I think that's really important. There's lots of leaders, lots of senior managers who do things as a tick in the box. So for example, they would go into conferences or through MBAs, they say you need to have a crisis management plan. So he'll go to his office and say, yeah, we have a crisis management, tick. So that's not, well, do you really believe in it? Do you really practice it? Do you do emergency drills and so on? I mean, unfortunately, in Jeddah in Saudi, we know when it rains heavily, there's a flood. It's unbelievable how many companies claim that they do have crisis management plan, but when the floods happen, they're all in trouble. Nobody knew what to do when it actually happens. So I think it's genuinely believing in it. Communication goes back to communication. If you don't communicate this to the whole workforce and make them believe that that's just an essential element of the business, and without it, we could be in real trouble. I mean, the recent hurricane in New York, New Jersey, Petra Solar the headquarters is in New Jersey. Again, huge flood, interruption to power, but because there was clear crisis management plan, everyone knew it and they practiced it. They minimized all the damages. So it's great. So what I'm saying is, have a crisis management plan, and don't have it because you're supposed to, have it because you really need it, and communicate it to the workforce, specifically to your middle management, so when the crisis occurs, you're ready and you can minimize as much as you can.
Mr. Hamadi, do you think that a company can be totally ready? And one more thing, because you are on the consulting side, so if you want to advise a company to invest in risk management, you are asking them to invest, put an extra cost for something that is intangible, because if the crisis doesn't happen, they cannot measure it, so it's a sunk cost. How can you convince a company to invest in risk management?
First of all, just to answer your first point, I don't think you can be fully predictive. I mean, it would be an illusion to think that you can predict every single event. Having said that, I believe that you can definitely be preemptive and preventive in the way you do risk management. When it comes to convincing the companies, I think a lot has to do with also the quality of the management of that company. When businesses are doing well, obviously management is being praised and everything. When in times of crisis, management is tested, that's where management really comes to the fore. And if management knows and appreciates the importance of being prepared and preventive and preemptive, I think convincing them is an easy task. And in terms of basically what ultimately needs to be done on the preemptive and preventive side, I think a lot of the companies have invested in risk management, but they've built kind of the basic fundamentals of risk management. So, put in place a risk measurement and risk monitoring processes and tools, having contingency plans, crisis management plans. But I think if you want to be predictive and preemptive, the investment in risk management is not that significant. All it requires is really be much more disciplined in the way you do certain things. For example, you need to have a discipline in terms of scenario planning. I mean, Mr. Ayat was mentioning scenario planning a bit earlier. You need to have a discipline in terms of stress testing. And these tools are not that expensive. You don't need to invest billions to have these tools in place. Likewise, early warning tools. So understanding, what are some of the factors or the triggers that are out there that might ultimately put your, bank or business in trouble.
Reading the signals
properly.
Reading
the signals,
basically.
reading, the economy, reading basically all the signs that ultimately you will need, will have an impact on your business.
George, always consultants are very good at putting diagrams and graphs, and if you were to divide this for us really in a process, what needs to happen in a company? Do you need a risk management team on board in terms of managerial processes that you need to put in place? So how do you do that to prepare a company?
Are you asking what do you need to do to put the risk management team in place?
The planning phase, and then during the crisis management. So how do you do that on management?
I think the planning is, from our perspective, when we advise our clients, we always think about risk management not in a vacuum. We think about it as a practice or as a discipline that is integrated with the way you manage your business altogether, whether it's strategically or operationally. And so there are certain elements that go into the building blocks of risk management, right? So back to the point I was raising, the fundamental risk measurement and detection, elements, the preemptive and preventive elements. But the key is then to take all this and then integrate it into one framework that links strategy, business planning, and risk management all together. And you know, I'm not going to divulge all our secrets to you here.
You're not going to draw the plan for us. Mr. Ayat, you mentioned lessons learned, but it was interesting when we were having this conversation before, when preparing for the panel, you told me no one can predict fully the crises. Now, Mr. Hamari mentioned that you can plan for risks, but not totally be prepared for any crisis. You were arguing that there's a difference between crisis management and risk management. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. What is the difference? Why can't risk management prepare you for future crises?
I feel that all companies, they have the risk management, which is a synonym of the internal auditing. It is a process that they study the potential threat. And they know that there are threats in the finance, in the process, in the inventory, and they deal with it. It is a process. Crisis, it is different. A crisis is something that it happens with no signs. It is a surprise. And the crisis, it threatens or harms the existence of the company or the stakeholders or the general the public. And the crisis has no time. In the risk management, there is time. Crisis, you have a short time and you have to do something
quickly.
Something quick. And in a crisis, it will give you maybe opportunity to have a change management. Coming from the automobile industry, if you allow me, I can use analogy about the automobile industry. Any company without having risk management, it is driving a car without brakes. They know that the car without brakes, they may hit.
رح يفوتوا بالحيط
In the crisis management, also from the automobile industry, if you are driving on the Emirates Road at a speed of 160 kilometer and the cruise control is on, and you enjoy the sunny day and the beautiful weather, and all of a sudden it's stuck. The speed is 160, it is not coming down, everything ceased to work. The crisis, this is a crisis, because there's no time. If you don't have the right way to deal with it, it is really disastrous. And in the crisis, as I said, this is something which it will make it tangible. Sometimes people, they consider it is not. It is a big thing. We learned a lot how to prepare our companies. I feel and I really trust that companies with the right leadership, they can help their organization to be prepared to a certain extent. Today, we have a problem with the leadership. People, they confuse management and the leadership. You can manage the business, you can manage the sales, you can manage the service, you can manage the customer, you can manage the people. This is pure management. Leadership is something else. The leadership is to create culture, inspire people, motivate the staff, empower them, create the culture of dedication, the commitment, integrity. It is, you know, that in the management, it is like you learn how to climb up the 7 habits of the most effective people for Stephen R. Covey. The leader has to make sure that the ladder is on the right wall, and after you will spend 10 years, you will not find yourself in the wrong place. So to prepare, first and foremost, please look for the right leadership, empower them. And my advice, I learned from this, you need the rich companies. We need to cut 10 to 15% of the profitability, put it in the fund. This is to face the crisis. This is important. Only companies with the healthy financial, they came up as stronger. And the company suffering from, they really
So what do we call this? A crisis fund? So this is your
I
recommendation.
think it is a crisis fund. Let's have this and to use it when crisis comes. It will come.
هيدي مثل خبي
It is
قشك
coming.
الأبيض ليومك الأسود. It's just you have to do it in a leadership position. Mr. Rahulan, you are on the other side of things. You have to basically convince your clients to do proper risk management. You have to have those leaders in place who are convinced that it is worthwhile to invest in risk management tools. How much do you see resistance to that, or the opposite? Do you think that after all these crises that we went through in the past few years, people have become more conscious that they have to have risk management plans in place?
This is one of my crises. So in reality, there is a whole challenge in organizations and institutions who own asset to spend more on the asset in terms of sustainability and creating values that would enable them to optimize their operation cost. Everybody looks at the operation cost as a prerequisite, but do not realize that if they are able to reduce the operation cost, there is a huge impact. So there are various ways to skin the cat. You really need to go back to the customer and try and identify his challenges. If it's a CapEx issue, you as a company, in terms of your current predicament, may want to go finance that whole part of the enterprise issue of CapEx. And this is exactly what we have done. We've created large projects under the branding of the whole country called the Emirates Energy Star, for example. We fund the project on behalf of the customer, enable him to create the sustenance value, and then from the savings that he achieves out of the project, we're able to mitigate the risk of bringing back the revenue into the coffers. So then you get engaged with the ecosystem. You really work with banks and other institutions who help you to put this package together to enable a national program. So these are some of the avenues that you got to address. And there are situations where you even have people who create crisis when there are no crisis. So this is a true factor of the current realm.
Someone mentioned a little bit earlier the regulators, I think Mr. Hamari, when we were talking about the banking sector. But I want to change that question to your industry. How much does regulation play a role in forcing companies to put risk management plans in place?
Institutional regulations in terms of compliance from government is paramount in terms of how people look at various factors in sustainability, especially, which is our core business motives. So there is huge impact in governance, bringing in laws that enable people to reduce their spend on energy and the consumption patterns. So if there is legislation, it's much easier and safer in terms of how the whole process is addressed.
Let's take a couple of questions from the audience, if there are any. If you have any question to any of our panelists, please raise your hand so that you can address your question. Can we pass on a microphone to the second table there, please?
Thank you. Ali Borhani again. Just one comment and one question for the panel. Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff of Barack Obama, who's the Chicago mayor today, is saying a good crisis is too good of an opportunity to let go by. So I think it's partly the vision as well of how we look at the crisis. I'm married to a Lebanese lady, and the joke in the Lebanese community is that with the Sandy storm, there's no shortage of Lebanese entrepreneurs selling diesel generators in New York right now. So it all depends on how you look at it. But I think the crisis as well has to become personal. And in 2008, we saw a lot of access coming down and general layoffs. Are there better ways of addressing such movements in terms of collective pay cuts and becoming personal with the staff and communicating? And in the case of Damas, for instance, Damas Gold, to go back even to the frontliners at the stores and tell them how they have been affected by such crisis, if you could touch on that.
Mr. Walid, let's start with the issue of the unemployment. We'll talk a little bit later about turning it into an opportunity, but the issue of limiting the damage in terms of pay cuts and
I think
layoffs.
I was just reading an interesting article recently from Harvard Business Review, and what attracted my attention is most companies that went bankrupt, the main reason was communication. And you say, well, that doesn't make sense, but it was communication between leadership and the management and the whole staff. I truly believe if you're open and transparent with your staff. You tell them, look, we do have an issue. This is the issue. This is what we're going to try and do about it, and get some feedback so they feel they are part of the solutions. I believe it will minimize the risks, and it will minimize any consequences on what's going to happen. So I think everyone who was in UAE in 2008 knew there's an issue. So how the companies managed to handle this, and how they managed, more importantly, how they communicated this to their staff and made their staff part of solutions, those companies being more successful than others. So in my view, just to answer the question, is absolutely, I think get the staff involved from day one, communicate openly and honestly, and let them come up with solutions. So trust me, lots of them will accept a compromise in their income in order to save the organizations and keep their job.
Mr. Saraf, do you want to say anything about Damas again?
I think it's already touched upon. A lot of it has to do with the communication, how you manage, and it's important to, part of the business is to make sure that the operations of the business continue going and in a healthy pace, so that you can support the business and support what was happening in the background on the financial side. So it was important to make sure that the employees do understand that the survival of the company and the health of it is critical, and to get them involved in that kind of a process. Make sure they're incentivized to keep on selling, keep on promoting the brand, and providing the customer service that they have been before, to ensure that the sales continue for the business, because that was critical. The issue was cash flow, and you needed to make sure that you have to get that to support the company. So once, again, it goes back to communication, clearly stating out what was the issue, making them understand what the problem is, and then and put down what the solutions that in this case the board of directors are taking to help and revive the company to the state where it was. And actually, if you look at it today, the company has done that. It managed to go through that crisis that it had. It's the repayment of the loans have actually started back. A big part of the loans have been repaid. It was sold to Al-Manna'i group in Qatar, and the reason why they bought into it, because they see the potential, the growth of the company. So, and that comes in from the whole business as a whole, the employees and the management.
Do we have another question before we proceed? Please raise your hand so that I can see you. Can we pass on the microphone to the lady over there? I'm keeping the issue till the end of whether you can transform crisis into an opportunity, or whether it does trigger positive change in any company.
I'm Jennifer Arkest, director of Arkest and Abdullah Consultancy. I'm a lawyer. With regards to the companies advising and keeping their staff informed in advance as to what's happening in the company, I don't think it particularly is going to work in this region. The reason being that employees most of the time do not have any protection under the law. And so if they hear any adverse...
we didn't hear you. The reason is that most of the time
because the employment laws in this country do not protect employees. So the minute they hear any adverse information about the company, they'll rather jump ship than sit and wait around. And that is the experience, at least I know, in this region. Perhaps in Europe or in the US it might be different, because if you've been in the company, for example, 20 years, the company can't just kick you out. The compensation that you'll have to pay you is going to be enormous. Yes. But here, it doesn't really matter.
She's saying that the laws here do not protect the employees as should be. So this is why companies do not communicate properly with their employees. And she says it doesn't work in this case. So does anyone like to answer this question?
Maybe I can comment. The organization, they have the objectives to succeed. And apart from the regulations, the logger, if they really protect the people or not. Our duty, the responsibility of the organization to retain the talents. This is important. We cannot stop people from moving from one company to another company. This is not fair. This is not right. But we have to provide the employees and the cadre with the training, with the development, with the recognition, with the right compensation. Today, it is very difficult to find the right people. The problem that we are all facing is the absence of the right people who are able to implement the right system and the processes. So regardless whether the company, whether the government, they have the regulations or not. And today, I think in the Emirates, it is really flexible. The employees, they really enjoy the freedom of moving from one company to another company, even within the same industry. But the responsibility here, it is not the government, it is us.
Let's move on to the most interesting, I think, topic of this conversation, and it is that does a crisis, when it happens, does it present an opportunity for change, and does it, the title is Arises Critical Thinking, does it really necessitate critical thinking, and can companies come out stronger from crisis than they were before? Mr. Rahul, let's start with you. What do you think?
I fully agree with the concept that a crisis is an opportunity. And in our particular case, it has phenomenally been an opportunity to look at outside the box in terms of how we could take our technology into various spectrums of the economy. And this has not only given us opportunity in the regional market, it made Pacific Controls a global company. And without the crisis, I don't think we would have addressed that because we were preoccupied with what was happening in the local market. This is definitely our story.
Mr. Haymari, if we were to analyze why, and it's not always the case, only certain companies manage to do that. So what does it take to do that, and do you think it presents a good opportunity for change?
Look, I think actually crisis does provide opportunities, and I see that in two ways, if you will. The first one is more internal. In that, crises provide opportunities to be a bit more introspective. And that means basically looking at or rethinking, the way you do business, rethinking your business model, your operating model, and also rethinking some of the core elements that make up your business. And then making the appropriate changes that are required. And here, I think back to the point that was raised by the audience, this requires significant leadership. So, the first reaction to any crisis is a knee-jerk reaction. Let's cut costs. Let's, and let's tackle the biggest component of that cost, which is to let go people. But in reality, what the crisis should actually allow is a more strategic look at where to cut costs, and is this the right thing to do. And so by doing that, I believe that companies can be better prepared or can become more fit for expansion and future growth. Secondly, there is an opportunity for them to reinforce their talent by weeding out underperforming
units or business units.
And there's an opportunity to reinforce also their governance, right? I think what the crisis also showed is that a lot of the boards, for example, that were governing the companies were not really prepared to deal with the crisis because they either did not understand the risks that were involved or didn't know how to deal with them. And the opportunity then becomes to basically reinforce these boards with the right individuals who understand risk, who can really react to the crisis. But it's also an opportunity to bring in the right leadership. Again, companies always focus on CEOs that can do well in the good times, right? They're able to grow the business. But in reality, one of the criteria, I think, going forward should be that they should also look for CEOs who can steer companies in troubled times. The other side to the opportunities is external. And it's no secret that companies that kind of emerge from the crisis rather resilient or unscathed look for opportunities to grow, either by acquiring other companies or by entering new markets. I mean, there are plenty of examples, I think, even in the financial world where this has happened. So if you take the JP Morgan example, where JP Morgan went on an acquisition spree, right in the middle of the crisis.
Because they had a better situation than others.
Because they were more resilient, better prepared to deal with the crisis. Another example is Santander, for example, which in the midst of the crisis in the UK went and bought the RBS branches in the UK and were able, as such, to double their market presence.
Just a quick follow-up question. If we were to look at the trends happening in the financial sectors in the region as a result of the crisis, what do you think are the major trends that you are seeing in terms of change in the way they do business.
Well, I can tell you for a fact that some have not learned a lot from the crisis. But most institutions, I think, have now a much better appreciation for what it takes to manage their businesses going forward. And the things that they're doing go back to some of the things I mentioned, which is, one, reinforcing their governance and their risk management practices, and building these preemptive and preventive risk management practices. The second thing is looking at how to improve the quality of earnings. It's no secret that over the years, banks were just
aggressive, lending everyone. So
going and being a bit more aggressive than they should be, just to make the earnings look good. And as such, going forward, there's much more emphasis on quality of earnings. The third aspect, I believe, is looking at the state of the business and rethinking what I said earlier, rethinking whether they are as efficient as they should be, right? So more emphasis on productivity, on ensuring that we're not cutting costs just for the sake of removing a line or a figure in the income statement, but really investing in increasing productivity and efficiency going forward.
Mr. Abu Khalid, do you believe that when a crisis happens, it gets you to a state where you have to rethink your whole business, and maybe you can move forward in a better direction than you were before, or this rarely happens? It takes a lot for this to happen.
I'm a true believer of having thorough studies of all the possible scenarios that could happen, even the cruise control scenarios. I think a good crisis management plan should have that scenario listed, say, if this happened, that's the action we're going to take. And I'm saying this mainly to reduce any risk. So I'm more of a believer of always be ready, and also believer of having a solid leadership team to give you all the trends and things that are happening, so you know what you're facing. So
you can
don't
monitor what's happening,
and you don't get to a point where you say, "Wow, am I on the wrong business?" And I think I'll just give you a live example about Saudi Arabia now. There's been various reports, but one of the reports saying by 2028, 50% of the oil produced in Saudi will be consumed locally.
Well, some say by 2030 it will be gone. It will become an importer instead of exporter.
Yeah. And some, as you said, because there's various reports, and you don't know really which one to believe, but by 2030, that's it, Saudi can't export anymore. So I think clever companies don't wait for the crisis to happen, but they jump on the wave immediately. So I think that's where renewable energy, smart energy start to play part. Say, what about if I can come up with solutions to solve that problem? And they use the crisis of others for their own benefits and for their own growth, rather than waiting for crisis to happen to you in order to come up with critical thinking. So I think embed risk management as part of the culture of your organizations, and hopefully you will get to a point where if crisis occurs, you're ready for it, and you don't really need to change tactics completely because you've played all the scenarios. So I'm just really believer of being ready as much as you can.
Mr. Saraf, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, especially that you have had examples, specific examples of this happening, where you had to change the business model of companies, but then it worked out.
I think, that's the thing, part of the crisis was, and just George touched upon it, which is the ability to kind of go in and change management. And with maritime industrial services, for example, the crisis had happened on the cash flow side, and the board and the shareholders recognized that there is a need, even though the owners were actually the managers of the company, that they did not have the skill set to manage this type of a crisis and cash flow management and the ability to get it out, a turnaround situation, by which we actively went out and found the right people to come in and manage it, which they did, and there was a complete recovery of the company, which was eventually sold out to a strategic buyer. So this was very critical, and because of that scenario, that was when we were able to actually change the management team, put in the new people who helped do the turnaround and then continue the growth of the company, and that was critical for it. We had similar situations in other companies, and you do actually end up finding from these kind of crises that you have certain items that you can recognize, fix, and try to use that to your advantage, to help you out in order to achieve certain targets they want to do in the future. Whether it's actually putting in place the right processes, the right corporate governance, it just forces the owners of the business to recognize that there's an issue and there needs to be addressed. Sometimes when you're in a growth phase and the region has only seen growth until recently, you take things for granted, and things, no matter how badly you do things, it keeps on doing well because the economy is growing. In Saudi we see that businesses are just doing well, whether no matter what.
Regardless of what's happening around them, all over the world.
Regardless of the processes, the operations of the companies themselves, but just because of the nature of the economy, it's just moving. However, the crisis all of a sudden had changed things, and once we saw that, all of a sudden companies had to retrench, and then they had to recognize, wait a second, the way I'm doing things is actually completely wrong, and that's why all of a sudden they started bleeding cash and losing money, whereas before they didn't. Not many companies were able to recognize what was the issue and able to fix it. Some actually were, and that's where the opportunity comes in. When you're able to recognize what has happened and fix it, and ideally take that advantage. So that's why I think the crisis that we did have was actually a blessing in a way, because we're a new market. We're a very nascent market. And we needed to experience that. Whereas in the Western markets and more developed markets, they've seen, this is not the first cycle of boom and bust that they've seen. So they were able to adapt to it, except that this was much more severe than they expected. We, fortunately or unfortunately, had a very severe bust all of a sudden for the first time.
Samir, I just want to stop for a quick follow-up question. In the Musk case, you talked about a change of management, but most of the time, the existing management has to go through the exercise. So it's not about management change, maybe only in specific cases. When is it a specific case where you need the management change to happen first before adapting, rather than keeping the same management
For a crisis? It's usually when you have your mini crises, internal mini crises, and there's certain, usually when from our perspective as a private equity investor, when we go in, we have certain milestones and certain targets that we want to achieve as we go along. And usually when we're going in, we believe or we expect that the management has the ability to get to that point in time, and we empower that management and work with them to get to those targets. When you start noticing that some of those targets are not achievable due to the lack of ability of that management team to put in place those things and get the things done, and it's not as a factor of the market around it, then you need to go in and step in and make changes. And we've done that in some companies. It's not something that we like to do, but we had to do it, where the growth of body mass is a chain of...
So for allowing all the Gulf countries to work there. Yes. So we are now responsible for the new business brands and the China, where we are now dealing with the emerging markets, and for potential markets, the Iraqi market. So we did acquisition, we did alliance, and this was possible because the organization was financially really solid. So these are some of the opportunities. Today we are 2,500 people more, and I think that we are going to the target that I set for the company to be $2 billion by the year 15.
We hope you can achieve that.
You.
Let's just see if there are any other questions from the audience for our panelists. Khulud, can we pass on the microphone? Ah, you have it. We can't hear her. Let's try again.
Okay. I believe everyone here know about Aramco crisis.
Yes.
And we would like to hear from your guests, all your guests, a quick advice how we handle this crisis.
Okay.
Thank you.
The hacking that happened to Saudi Aramco, basically their systems were hacked, and basically there wasn't a lot of communication, I have to say, about that, but it went out in the public that there was a big hacking to Aramco systems. How can a company avoid something like that? Well, since you come from Saudi, I think you are the best positioned to talk about that.
And I totally agree with you. Not lots of communication went out about the cause or what happened exactly.
We have to say, though, that Aramco is so critical,
Exactly.
and it is in a unique position, I think, not similar to any other company in the world, probably.
But what I'm so sure about is Aramco is not the only company that's been attacked at that level. And we're talking through multinational companies, other multinational companies. They face exactly the same. They sort it without sometimes single communication going out. Sometimes they do, they have to, sometimes they don't. But again, I resemble everything about our whole topic today is like having a heart attack. You could have a mild heart attack, and this is a wake-up call for you to say, wow, I have to live healthier, I have to do some sports, I have to eat better. Or you could have a heart attack, that's it, you never come back again. So it's I'd rather, before this heart attack happened, that you're aware of all the possible risk scenarios. And there's so much data about internet hacking, about IT and so on, that's chief technology officer or chief information officer should be fully aware of and try and protect his system as much as you can. So don't wait for this crisis to happen for you to come up with a solution. So with the Aramco case, it happened. Maybe it's something, I have no doubt, I've dealt with Aramco many times before. They do have all the right protections and they do have the firewalls, but every day something new is invented.
It happened to Arabia, by the way. Our websites were hacked, and on Twitter there was a feed of news that we weren't.
You did not do.
We were not broadcasting, and now certain measures were taken whereby it's become so difficult for us because so many systems have been put in place to avoid that in the future, but it is a little bit cumbersome. So there's a line to draw here on how much protection do you want to do versus not affecting the business, the flow
I agree.
of business.
It becomes to an investment. Is the investment worth it? Because you can go so far and then say, well, that's the maximum I can do, but something new will happen tomorrow, so then you have to cater for this. I think, to me, failure is only if you don't learn from it, if you don't recover from it, and if you don't do something about it.
Mr. Dilip, I don't know if you want to comment on that, because it is within the ICT. I mean, you are,
Yeah,
although it's a different sector than what you work in.
The pervasive internet has literally taken over every business realm, and the whole concept of ensuring that you're able to segregate your challenges in terms of mitigating risk for hacking and various other third-party functions, depending upon how you open up your philosophy in allowing the right people to do the right things. There are specialists who actually have created core competencies in ensuring that protection of data is primarily a tool that is enabled in a dynamic manner. You actually have to relentlessly ensure that security of your data is maintained through adapting to new technologies and enabling specialists to ensure that this can be brought to the forefront. Our example is we actually have lots of data that's particularly for critical applications for government and private sector. And this is one of our biggest challenges, that we have dynamic needs to ensure that we look at both the software side and the hardware side to ensure protection for our customers' data. Our whole business is dependent on data and data archiving.
On that note, I have to thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us today. We won't keep you longer because I'm sure that everybody would like to go to lunch. Baxter has all the details.
Ladies and gentlemen, please let's thank Nadine Hani for her excellent panel discussions. Nadine, because you've done so well, we've decided to award you with another 3 after lunch.
Another 3 panels. Thank you very much. Well,
ladies and gentlemen, a fabulous panel discussion, lots of learning, lots of talk of transparency and crisis management plans. And I'm delighted to know where half the Lebanese population are. New York, I believe, somebody said.
Yes.
Good to know. Helpful for you, Nadine.
You know, if Sandy had happened in Lebanon, no one would have been affected. We're living without electricity anyway, 24 hours per day.
Ladies and gentlemen, lunch is now served in Ballroom C, which is to your right as you exit. Again, we would like to thank our sponsors, Lexus, Alphatane Motors, and our preferred sponsors, Al Tayyar Travel Group and SP Jain. Ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to joining us tonight, 7 o'clock, for the cocktail evening. It is dinner and award ceremony starting at 7 o'clock in this ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, do enjoy lunch. And again, thank you to Nadine and our panelists on behalf of Forbes Middle East.